Hello, everyone. How's it going?
Привет, hello.
How are you, Daniel?
It's a good day,
It's good day.
on the whole.
That's good.
How's everyone?
I'm well. We just had a team meeting, which was great, and ready for an exciting Twitter space. And then, I don't know, maybe I'll go out with the dog. It's nice and sunny today.
You know, despite everything in the news, I think it's important to keep our joys, and I feel like I have had a lot of time just humanizing this issue and seeing into people. I think that's probably what got me into this space.
Yeah, it's those connections that you make, I think, that keeps us going, keeps us working, keeps us trying when the big picture is too scary.
I think I can speak to that in and that being why I ever got involved and became more than a bystander or just a commentator on the sides. I think it was watching in the early days of the full-scale invasion what Ukrainians were saying in Ukrainian amongst themselves and digging into that. And yeah, some of us could have romanticized all of that and just told Ukrainians nonstop, "Oh, you're so brave." And yes, that's true, and it's very necessary. It's compulsory in this situation if you want to live. But what really matters if we are to be really present for Ukrainians and support them as well as we might is to actually listen and get their input and see their humanity in the midst of that. And so that's why I feel like diving into the language and culture has been so important.
Yeah, I can totally see why that would happen, especially if you're listening in Ukrainian. For me, I remember because I was, watching from the sidelines as a bystander, watching the international news about what was going on, and I thought, oh, it's horrifying, but at the same time, not really getting involved in any way. But it wasn't until I started meeting students and started talking to them that you really you get to know the humans involved instead of the statistics and the numbers and the territory taken. I mean, those things are all important as well, but it's a very different feeling when you have a personal connection with someone who's in a war. And that's what we want to build at Balakun is thousands of personal connections so that people can't turn off. People can't just say, oh, that's terrible, and go back about their day.
As someone involved in the volunteer translator pods, I have experienced that for myself where I focused on just translating a text and just worked through all of its issues. And actually, my role tends to be to comparatively look at different translations of different levels of expertise and apply what I learned to what my tools are saying and apply my beginner level Ukrainian to that. And then to take that to Ukrainians and have a conversation about it. And and it's a laborious task, but every step along the way has its value. I remember the first time I felt like I needed to hit a translate button and say something in Ukrainian to a Ukrainian. It was just a few days in to the full-scale invasion, and I was reading a thread in Ukrainian about them experiencing survivor's guilt, which that is a reality. It does, I mean, from one perspective, you could say, you deserve to live, you deserve to win. What's to feel guilty about? But no, that is a real thing because people are connected and they are feeling for those who are paying the ultimate price. And am I any better? Or why can't I be with them? Or however way you can feel about that, that if you don't feel like you are sharing as much as you want to share in what's happening. And I, as a beginner, I have to be self-conscious that I am not as impacted as the person I am feeling for, who is in turn feeling like they are not as impacted or bearing as much of the burden as they wish they were. And their loved one is right there on the front. So, who says what and who can presume? Well, that's an open question. But I saw so much that I felt like I had to say something. And approximately in English, this is what I said. And it took a lot of shuffling around between different translators before I felt comfortable daring to say it. And it is put yourself in the shoes of your loved one on the front. If you were them and you know them well, they would be thinking, they would be thinking of you the way you are thinking of them, don't you think? And you would be glad that they were safe. Whoever actually wound up being there on the front is doing what they can, but your heart is just as good for wanting to be there. Keep pulling, keep fighting. You're all in this together. And I could have gone wrong in a zillion ways saying that, but the feedback was, and I say this feeling like I it was lucky that I actually got the intended message through, was that people were saying in Ukrainian, I don't know who you are, but I needed to hear that. And that the only reason I feel like I was ready to say something like that was encountering survivor's guilt in other places. And I just wanted to help Ukrainians the best I was able. And nothing is taken for granted. We cannot simply say, well, I did this thing right, so from now on I am an authority. We cannot build up hubris. Hubris that way. That that is it is important to be a humble person going forward whenever you're walking in someone else's world. But um, that's when I got off the chair and where I went from.
Yeah, that's so good. Um, and I can understand your worry because there's so many nuances about how you say something like that, and not have a lost in translation moment where you say the completely wrong thing. But I think just hearing it in their language would have meant a lot. We were talking about this with Daniel Broomfield on the podcast the other day about how, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake, if you're even just trying to use Ukrainian, it makes the other person feel a different way. Do you know what I mean?
Well, Ukrainians have been so long unheard, whether they speak Ukrainian or some Russified language. Um, the consistency is that they are unheard, and I feel like that contributes directly to how history has transpired. And so that's one of the reasons I feel like I need to be with those who are saying, listen to Ukrainians. And when I was asked to drop in as a guest here, um, I was curious to know, well, what do you want to know? And one of the questions was, why why did you feel it's important? And there was a quick answer to that, but then I started thinking. I had some studies in cultural anthropology, and I felt like that informed it, and I only had to look through my old textbooks and the essays that we were reading to find out why. When you're in someone else's world and you go in with your assumptions from where you're at and you miss something about that and they start getting pissed off or they start pleading with you like no, don't say that. Your job there is not to tell them, no, I'm right about this and you're wrong, and I'm here to help. So how dare you say? No. In every major lecture I ever had in anthropology class, and in every essay where you started realizing that you were not getting everything, or that you had stepped on toes, or that the locals disagree with you, is exactly when you're on the brink of learning something that clinches a whole new level of understanding that helps you connect to these people. And from my perspective, when some people in the intention of supporting Ukrainians have kind of gone a bit off track and argued with Ukrainians or felt a bit brittle in their feelings. Like, I mean, aren't I doing enough? Aren't I supporting? I mean, I'm not just a bystander here, but in their world and in their experience, you have to overcome that. And it is not a threat to anybody. It is not terrible to be wrong about something that is still new to you. It's actually a huge opportunity. And give Ukrainians that gift, I would say. Give them the gift of being able to listen and find out where our Western assumptions were wrong. That is so important.
Yeah, and allowing us to be corrected, as you say, that's the opportunity that you don't get anywhere else. If you're talking to someone who's really there, who's really living through this, they can correct your assumptions or even your well-intentioned mistakes, you know?
I feel prompted to read a poem that I translated from Ukrainian in response to that. Um, I think I think a few here have heard this. Lena Kostenko, she is a living treasure amongst Ukrainian poets. And there is a poem of hers. The first one that I really felt moved to translate was Life goes on without proofreading, and time flies, its gallop never slows. The Marquis de Pompadour is long dead and gone. We're alive after the deluge has ebbed low. I don't know what will come after us, what clothing nature will wear. The only thing that does not get tired is time. Since we're alive, we hurry to get there. To do something, to leave something behind, and we, like shadows, are passing, so that only the blue eyes of the sky can see the land in all of its blooming. So that these forests don't die out like the aurochs, so that the words don't fade like ore in the rocks. Life goes on, all without proofreading, and as you write, it will be forevermore. But do not be afraid of an unfortunate verse, nor of insights, because they come like a cure. Do not be afraid of the truth, however bitter, nor of sadness running a river's course. Be afraid only to deceive someone's soul. Fail this, you fail forevermore. There you go. Lena Kostenko.
That's beautiful and so apt for this conversation. Thank you so much, Daniel. Um, it's an interesting. If you don't mind, I wanted to go back to what you were saying about guilt because one thing I've noticed is that everybody feels it, no matter where they are. Like if they had to leave their home, they feel guilty. If they are still at home but they're not on the front line, they feel guilty. If they're on the front line but other people have passed away, have died, they feel guilty. Everybody feels it to some extent who I've talked to, um, and it's it's really hard to it's hard to know what to say because on the one hand you want to say you have nothing to feel guilty about it. This is somebody else started this, but at the same time you have to allow that feeling to exist, and I struggle with that, to be honest.
I want everyone to know that we are all in that together in some way, on some level. It can be, um, it can be comparatively mild, perhaps, to to be a world away and not Ukrainian at all. I didn't deepen connections to Ukraine until February 2022, and the reason I did that when I was actually in an info space before that that would have downplayed it a bit, and I caught on to that. But I have a consistent view of war, that the first voices you've got to hear are the peoples whose lives and fates and homes are in the balance there. Talk to the locals. And there's another thing I would like to read. It is a translation of a Ukrainian podcast where they were talking about it. Something that um, Ukrainian podcaster Sofia Turetz said when she talked to refugees. She said, I hear about life on pause. I hear about slow speeds, living at these slower speeds, about guilt, fear of reproach, fear of judgment, so many other things. And I was wondering why mice in some experiments, and she speaks of experiments where mice were tethered together, so if one decided to jump on a wheel and go for a big run, the other was obliged to do so as well. I was wondering why the mice in the experience didn't want to do something that usually brings them pleasure. And let's go back to that picture. One mouse wants to jump on that wheel. And this is kind of like the human that wants to travel, and they're traveling because this is the great idea. And someone who is forced to leave their home and be a refugee by comparison, they might have some stupid bystander saying, well, it doesn't look like you're suffering that much. You're getting to stay in England or you're getting to stay in Spain. Um, Sophia continues. So, in this famous study where two mice were encouraged to just run on wheel, and the mice loved that, but the other was forced to run the wheel when the other was running. That is the desire of the other. The mouse on the that jumped on the wheel was getting all the benefits of their own free will. They felt better, they enjoyed life, they had a great heart rate. But the second mouse had all the negative effects of stress, constant stress, because it's the will of others. And and yeah, so there's 1,000 different ways that this is impacting everyone. And there is no secret shame in feeling, I wish I could be doing more, or I don't think I could ever do enough for Ukraine or refugees, or um, I could have been the person that I wish to be here. This is about listening and continual growth, and I'll leave it at that.
I think one thing that we can do is, especially when the big picture seems so daunting, focus on the little wins, the little victories, the little achievements, and then just know that you're going from one to the next, and you don't have to achieve everything you want to at once. I don't want to completely take over the conversation here. So if anybody else has questions for Daniel, please feel free to raise your hand or just speak up. But I'm loving just talking to you, Daniel. So we'll keep going. But please, everyone else, feel free to just jump in if you have anything else you'd like to add or to comment on. Daniel, how has your Ukrainian learning progressed?
You know, I really feel that spoken Ukrainian has moved much more slowly than I would like in the spontaneous sense, because I do spend most of my time comparing translated text and not just, of course, there are AI translations from different sources. Then there are human translations. And so what I tend to focus on, and of necessity, because that is actually what I'm volunteering to do, are these long texts. And sometimes I start to read it out loud. And honestly, my best Ukrainian probably comes through when I'm reciting Perebendia by Taras Shevchenko. And I do love that poem. And I play it from native speakers in slow motion, just still trying to get those vowels right. Those vowels are my big challenge. Yeah, English is very free form and has many different dialects, and Ukrainian tends to have a much more specific sense of it. But so yeah, yet again, I don't feel like I've done nearly as much as I could do, but every chance I get to do more is thrilling.
Yeah. Well, yeah. On the podcast, Vita and I exchange a word each week, and he's starting easy for me, easy ones. But one day, the end of the season, I'm gonna manage to say mushroom. That's my goal. It's two sounds that don't really happen in English, and I really struggle with it.
Anytime you feel like you're struggling, just remember the time sent journalists who had to publicly correct and say, uh, the word for flatbread in Ukraine actually isn't Rusny Pizda. And well, these things are to be expected. I actually had an experience recently of realizing that I did not have a full and deep understanding of the Ukrainian that I'd already come to love. You see, in recent months, whenever I get a chance to donate to Come Back Alive or any of the fundraisers that Ukrainians are recommending and boosting on Twitter, I have this song that I totally love. It's by Yuri Kwok. Their name is in Polish, but all the members are Ukrainian, and the majority of their songs are remakes of Ukrainian folk songs. And there is a song of theirs, Zapaska Kobaska, and it is a lively electro folk song about Vasil and his goat who follows him around, and wherever the goat goes, the rye is growing abundantly. It's like God sent the wheat, and it sounds like a song of abundance. And here, in fact, I will read to you the description of the song, which I thought was a complete understanding. And this song became my happy anthem for donating to Ukraine. And it simply says, oh, hold on, my my screen got torn away from it.
No worries.
It says it is about a positive relationship between the owner and his goat. Ah, wow, sounds pretty straightforward, right? And then I started sharing with Ukrainians how much I love this song, and I turned the volume up whenever I donate to Come Back Alive. And then they started alerting to me. Well, the translation makes it look like he took off his jacket and inserted the sausage. Some of the AI translations would have you believe he took off a spare tire and inserted the sausage. Now that already might be cluing you in that this is not quite the journey that you meant to go. Well, someone recently alerted me. Zapaska is a traditional Ukrainian skirt. So he took off, or he put on the skirt and then put in a sausage. I think that there's some innuendo here. And yes, that would be true. Um, there's and then they include me in more. And Malanka in this song, this name, that's not a pastry, that's a proper name. Okay, so Vasil is
Oh
putting in the
dear.
sausage and laying Malanka on a bench. Oh wow, this is getting way more spicy. And then they drop the coup de grace. This is a traditional folk song for the upcoming festival of Malanka. And there's a little tradition in Ukrainian villages where Ukrainian couples uh, actually cross dress. They actually put on each other's clothes, and there's a there's a tradition of them having someone dressed up as a goat, and they go around caroling. And this is a part of the end of year Malanka celebration. Um, this is completely not what I expected from the beginner level introduction to Ukrainian, and yet this is still my favorite song, and I am not going to change it. Here,
Uh,
I'm going to put a
context is
picture.
everything.
I'm going to put a picture of this on the nest. You can just imagine how completely different this was than I was picturing. So, yeah. Um,
It's almost like those songs that you used to listen to as a kid, and then you listen to it as an adult and go, "Wait a minute, that's not what they meant."
Not at all. But that was actually one of the funny things that I learned. Uh, that One of those things that I found in a lot of these folk songs, there's a playful attitude towards cross-dressing, and this playful side of Ukrainian culture may not have gotten uh, all the visibility that we've seen here. I am just going to put this up in the nest. This this cute couple and this crazy goat. And yeah, so moral of the story, always ask Ukrainians what you think you understand of their world before you say anything big.
Especially on television.
Uh, Indeed. And let's
Yeah.
see. Oh, and there it. Hang on, I'm just trying to get it into the space. This picture is so funny. Um, so here, and I have shared it. I'm sorry. I will not belabor the point. But all I can tell you is that I told Tatiana of what I had learned, and it appears that she is cracking up because of this.
Great. Uh, anybody else have any questions for Daniel? I'm just going to keep throwing the opportunity out there. All right. So Daniel, what what are the biggest challenges with the translation? I mean, I know we have all these AI tools and we have translators, but as you said, there's often a need for context. So do you need to go and talk to people about what you're translating all the time, or is it just if there's something that you don't really understand or you think you might have got the wrong edge of the stick, as it were?
Well, I would say that talking to Ukrainians and reading their history and reading quality translations of other similar content is always important, always. And that is what is missing. One of the reasons I got involved was when we saw those videos of Ukrainian defenders tearing down the propaganda posters. Uh, so many of us, any of us who love Ukraine, we remember that moment where the Russian poster comes down and there's Taras Shevchenko, and there it is, verses from his famous poem Caucasus. And let's see. Remember what those verses said. Let's try with the with I would say yeah. Where is it? And glory to you, blue mountains, snow and ice cover you. And glory to brave heroes. God does not forget you. I'm now just having to speak off the top of my head, but that was a chilling moment and a beautiful moment for so many of us. I got a special impulse to understand Tarasevchenko's better. And the AI tools, they butchered that poem. They terribly butchered it. And one of the reasons I came to know that it's now come to light is that that is a very, very complex poem. And Taras Shevchenko, he is alternating voices between his own voice and the voice of a Ukrainian in that situation. And he's also taking on a satirical Russian voice. And the reason that you can tell is because of the meter that he's using. When he's using the meter that is associated with Russian writers like Dostoevsky, he is actually satirically saying all the awful things that Russians say, the arrogant things that they would say to the people of the Caucasus, whom they are going to conquer. And it's full of cultural supremacism. You could not have inferred that from an AI tool. In fact, here's the other number one thing that you need to be conscious of when you're on Twitter and you just click translate on a Ukrainian tweet. These tools often get the conjugation wrong, which gets who is speaking to whom wrong, which can get what the object and the verb is wrong. I saw a dramatic difference between Google Translate and DeepL, for example. In this article talking about how Ukrainians were switching to speaking Ukrainian. And there is this key passage where I think even some of the Ukrainian supporters were messing up, where Google Translate would have had you believe when we speak Russian, it is not such a big deal to us. That was the Google Translate version. The the DeepL level of translation was making it clear when foreigners who only know Russian, or when old people only know Russian, when those people speak Russian to us, we do not make such a big deal out of it. But the bulk of the article clearly made it clear it is important to be speaking Ukrainian as a matter of Ukraine's own national and cultural survival. And just because Russian is now the language of the genocidal attacker, it is poison to so many, and that is why it is so important to switch to the language to so many Ukrainians, and why we need to honor that as supporters. And sure enough, I dropped the difference in these two translations and ran it by multiple Ukrainian friends, Ukrainians in Ukraine, Ukrainians in diaspora, and got confirmation that's exactly what it's saying. That's what we need to be doing with every delicate moment of our work as Ukraine supporters.
So on the flip side of that, I think we can one of the main goals of Balakun and having this practice is allowing Ukrainians to explain in English better. Um, do you see a big shift in people wanting to learn English in Ukraine? Maybe this isn't something you're particularly, um, I don't know, intricately aware of, but do you see that more and more people are wanting to learn English or learn to speak English, learn to be understood in English?
Well, we can definitely get our answer just looking at Ukrainian Twitter. You can see a huge increase in fluent English, eloquent English being spoken since February 2022. I mean, what would have happened if the English-speaking world had been listening in 2014 when the invasion actually began? We can only speculate as to how much better we could have done. But it's the best time to start listening to Ukraine, I think, was centuries ago, and the next best time is today. And and I have to say, shouts out to so many Ukrainian voices who are now so ably speaking English because they must. And also, if you follow this space, for some positions in Ukraine's government, it is now required to take English courses. So and that underlines how important it is for Ukraine to get its word out, to get its message out, and why I think a translator's work, even if you're volunteering as a beginner in Ukrainian language, but you know how to contribute in some way, you have an idea of how comparative language translation works, and you know how to do bulk work and turn to Ukrainians where you know, this matters because English language journalism has had some terrible gaps and some sometimes unconscious Muscovite bias. We have allowed Russia to be the historian of the very people it's trying to kill, and there is something so tremendously wrong about that. And there are too many actors that are actually consciously trying to make that happen in our space, and we are lagging behind Ukrainians in being able to detect that. So translating Ukrainian media into English, it really matters because it deepens our understanding, and it helps us avoid it helps us avoid some of the core mistakes. No, Ukrainians have done amazing things in getting themselves heard in English. There's no mistaking it, and I don't think I even know the half of it, and I am still in awe of it. So there you go. That I hope I've answered you.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. There's just something that you said there reminded me of a story in the um there was a bit of a scandal with New Zealand National Radio a few months ago where they found out that someone had been changing the words just very slightly to make them more to make them softer on the the Russian side, and I was just astounded that even this far away in New Zealand, and at our national radio, which is, funded by the public, someone in in such an important role of broadcasting to all of New Zealand had managed to change the way change important statements about the war in Ukraine in something like, I don't know, 20, 30 articles, and nobody had noticed. They just slightly changed the wording from the official Reuters text to make it um, more pro-Russian, and they'd managed to get away with it for so long. And I was just astounded that even here, even here, that the tentacles have gone so far.
I would say that journalists have not been held sufficiently accountable. And unfortunately, when many of them are held to account, you see a divide between those who are genuinely doing their best and they take the correction and they understand it and they explain it and they carry that new understanding forward and they give it to their readers. And others double down. And that is the dividing line between those who can help Ukraine and others who will inadvertently harm it at best and may well play the role of useful idiots or assets to Russia. And that's why I think there's a big underline under Ukraine Support 101. When they tell you it's Kiev, not Kiev, it's it is an invasion, not a conflict. All those things at the elementary Western level, it seems like nitpicking, but there are reasons why it matters. Every time the reason has not been obvious to me as a Westerner, but I made time to dig in and find out why that was a hot button issue for Ukrainians. I have found enormous validation for Ukrainians. There's several
Mhm.
things I wish to say we should all do, and that is get curious, explore more. One of the things that I think I might be doing more often than some, and I just want everyone to level up, is Google in Ukrainian. Do your searches on Twitter in Ukrainian. Get that perspective because people who have just cited only Western journalists as sources have perpetuated a lot of narratives that ultimately have blunted support for Ukraine, understanding of Ukraine, and helped Russia. And we have to be humble about that and make the change.
Yeah, I would agree there wholeheartedly. Um, and it made me think of another example we talked about recently, which was some words that must seem, as you said, nitpicky, or just you don't understand the importance of them, but using words like the war on Ukraine instead of the war in Ukraine, talking about the Ukraine, which was an example we talked about a few weeks ago in that Seinfeld clip that everybody knows, the Ukraine. And you just repeat it because you've heard somebody else say it, but you don't understand the context of why that's dangerous, and why that's a hot button issue, as you said, for Ukrainians, until you talk to somebody from Ukraine and they explain to you why. And that's why the, personal connections with people is the most valuable thing you have for understanding what's going on, in my opinion.
I think part of the way that we can love Ukraine from the West is not have to be told twice, not to hurt it, as Ukrainians tell us what hurts or helps. Um, and I think the other thing is, I have focused on poetry quite a lot. And I had the intuition that it would be a view into what beats in Ukraine's heart, what is present across the board, across a actually a very diverse range of views and ideas. But what does being Ukrainian make people kind of pull together over? And And what this does is it gives you a picture of what is valuable, what is the center. Um, when we go into this conversation with Western centered assumptions, we get it wrong. Now, okay, for example, Timothy Snyder is like, I would say, my guess is like 95% or better, really awesome on all things. And still, I see times that he has to be corrected. Now, here's an example where he's saying something absolutely 100% true from a Western perspective. Here's a quote of his. To become better, a country must lose its last colonial war. That is actually an extremely accurate and valid thing from the perspective of every formerly imperialist Western country, every country that is perhaps still dismantling its colonial history. But what does it mean to be from the country that is purely on defense, that has always been the colonized and not the colonizer? I came at this from a background of feeling strong support for indigenous people in the West, and I remember reading "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee" when I was 10 years old, and just crying my eyes out because I just read about how people lived and what they did before they were colonized, and then I learned what happened to them. That's one of the reasons why it was visible to me how evil what Russia was proposing to do to Ukraine was, and what the code words, even as awful as it were, I mean, as it was, you could see that much worse hid behind those things, behind that ethno-chauvinist, that imperialist view, and the fact that it was so incorrigibly doubled down on that colonialism, the very worst of it in our modern day, right now. And that is why some people claim to be anti-imperialist and get Ukraine completely wrong because they've never thought what it means to be on the defending side. You're not virtue signaling about getting the boot off from being an aggressor culture. You are hurting the people who are fighting for their lives. I think Yulia, I mean, well, I would have to spell it out. She made a Twitter thread that pointed out Russia has killed 28.6 million or more Ukrainians over the last century. That is an incredible, horrific genocide. It's amazing that Ukraine is alive, that Ukrainian speakers are among us, and that we have the chance to make the difference. And we don't just have some kind of history book or museum about this people that got erased. A lot of them did, but the fact that they survived and we can make a difference for the people who are alive now is a rare historic opportunity to make it a difference when it counts.
Yeah, that's an unfathomable number when you think about the population as a whole. Um, and so many, yeah. I think that what you're saying is right, though. Stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid of being corrected. This is what I say to people learning English. Don't be afraid of being corrected because that means you learned something. Same for us as we're learning about Ukraine, I think.
I would like to pause for any questions if there are, but otherwise, I would like to read a poem.
No questions. Go ahead.
All right. This is probably my best known translation by far. And um, when I set out to translate Ukrainian poems so I could finally understand them, I felt like the translations that I saw in existence were archaic and used old, sometimes even problematic English. And I've realized that AI translations were trained on on very old and messed up material in English that had nothing to do with Ukraine. So I dived in. And this poem turned out to be a much bigger explore than I would have even have guessed at the outset. Taras Shevchenko, Perebendia. And I will read parts of it in Ukrainian because let's give it that love. Perebendia, starý, slípuj, kto jeho neznaje. Vinizuri veszteletsia, tana kobzihaya, aktohaya, torznyut, idiakuliude, vinium tul vazhnyaye, katsam svitam nudit. I hope I did not butcher that excessively. And I will proceed on from here in English. Parabendia is old and blind. Who doesn't know him? He wanders the countryside and plays upon the kobza. And who's playing? Everyone knows. And people all thank him gladly. He chases away their sorrows, weary of the world though he be. A vagabond under the hedge, he lives there night and day. He has no home in the world. Fate plays its tricks in its way over his old head, and to him it doesn't matter. He sits there and sings. They say, "Oh, don't be so loud, my dove." But there he sings, and he knows that he is an orphan, alone with his sorrows, sitting under the hedge. That's Parabendia, quaint and old in years. He'll sing the heroic song Blackbird. He'll coo Turtle Dove to our ears. And to the ladies out in the fields, he'll sing of the spells they're casting. And in the tavern with the lads, he'll belt out something rowdy and rousing. And with the couples and their stern mother-in-laws feasting at their weddings, he'll sing of the singles left under the poplar trees, lonely and bewailing. And then a song of travails. I am Lazarus, he sings at the market, a lament, so you remember it. He will sing harder and harder yet of how the siege was raised. That's Parabendia. He's quaint and old in years. He'll sing, and he'll laugh, and then he'll bring you to tears. The wind is blowing from far away. He walks out into the steppe. A kobzar sits upon a grave and plays upon his kobza. Around him the steppe is like a vast sea, ever boundless and blue. And beyond and behind every grave is another grave, past sight, into his dreams beyond view. His gray mustache, his old beard, the wind blows this way and that, until it grows still at last to listen as the kobzar sings, his heart laughs, and his blind eyes turn to tears. Listen, lass. The old man is hiding in the steppe on that grave so that people don't see, to let the wind blow his words across the field so that people don't hear. Those words are God's. The heart freely speaks to God. The heart chirps the glory of the Lord. Its thoughts go to the ends of the earth in the clouds. The eagles fly overhead, and their wings beat the blue skies wide. And as they soar, they ask of the sun where it sleeps at night, how it'll rise. They listen to the sea's story roll on. They cry to the mountain sides, "Why art thou mute?" And they return to heaven, for there is sorrow on earth, for there is no secret corner in that expanse. To them who know all, to them who hear all, what the step says, where the sun rests, no one accepts him in the whole world, not one. He is as alone among them as is the high sun. People know him, for the earth that bears him. Yet if they heard him out there all alone, singing on the grave, talking to the steppe, at God's very word, they'd laugh and groan. They'd call him crazy. They'd chase him away. Leave it be, out on the steppe, they'd say. Dobre, mi kobzario, dobre baku rubbish. Що співати, возмовляти, nama hilo hodish. You do well, my Kobzar. You do well, Father, for what songs you sing, what words you speak when you go to visit that grave. Go on, my dove, till your heart finally sleeps, and sing your heart out so that people don't hear thee, so that people don't shun thee. Indulge them, my brother, and dance, my friend, as the host says. That's why he richly pays. That's Parabendia. He's quaint and old in years. He'll sing a song for a wedding, and he'll bring them all to tears. The end.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
I want to thank every Ukrainian who helped me understand this. The first reaction I got, Alona, I believe you saw the first rough draft of this, and your reaction was, "Oh my God, the intergenerational trauma, the pain that we have carried," and and that was the first thing that leapt out because the Cubs even in their day, and their story almost ended so brutally and tragically. But even in their day, they were carrying the wounds of Ukrainian people, of how the siege was raised. I am Lazarus. He is already the vessel of the culture's history, of the pain that is so much bigger than its day to day. And yet, there is a beauty there of life going on and people staying steadfast, but only sometimes do you face the heavy burdens of history. And that is a necessary human feature. Ukrainians don't get to avoid that these days. They don't get to tune out. And every time that we can help them carry a little bit of that, or at least let them know we see you, I think that's going to matter.
I'm so glad this was recorded. I hope many people get to hear that because I've never heard his poems in English.
Recently, I had the opportunity to to show some of these translations to Ukrainians, and we were talking about Caucasus, Taras Shevchenko's Caucasus being revealed as Russian propaganda posters were being stripped away, and Ukrainian defenders read it, and you just see their eyes start to shine with like strength and courage and just just flowing into their souls. Um, there was another such incident that I only learned of recently, and I didn't know about it. But a Ukrainian speaker was telling me how there was a time when they tore down a poster and another poem of Taras Shevchenko's was revealed. And here, let me read this one to you. It is much shorter. The uh, the Ukrainian version would be known. It's a little bit tricky. There are different meters and rhymes. It's very complex, and I don't think I can actually do it full justice. But here is the English. Neither Archimedes, sorry, neither Archimedes nor Galileo ever tasted wine. Rather, it was guzzled into greedy monks' bellies. And you, holy fathers, you have gone out all over the world and brought every morsel of bread to the miserly tsars. It will be crushed. This bitter harvest of tsars will be ground, and the people will rise up. The tsars will expire. They will no longer be born. And this was the part that came out from that poster. This was the verse that the Ukraine's defenders tore down. And upon the renewed earth will be no more enemies, no more foes, but there will be sons, there will be mothers, and there will be good people on earth. Those four verses were brought to light and Russian propaganda torn off from it, just like that famous incident. And as I was being told by Ukraine about this, they got goosebumps on their arms. There's some things that are nonverbal and speak so much more eloquently, and just telling me the story of what they saw. Um, the goosebumps on their arms told me I needed to tell you this today. And yeah, do not doubt the power of Ukraine's poetic voices who dared to write when the penalty for writing in Ukrainian could easily be death. Uh, it breathes strength into them, and I love every way I can bolster that.
You've done an incredible job of exposing us to those things that we wouldn't have seen, wouldn't have heard otherwise. So I'm really grateful for that. I do feel like I've taken over the chat, though. Does anybody else want to ask a question to Daniel?
I would especially welcome Ukrainian voices. I mean, I'm here for you guys.
I just like to listen to Daniel, so I don't have any questions because I talk to him like on a daily basis. So if somebody have questions to Daniel, please request the speaker.
Daniel, have you always studied poetry?
You know what? No, absolutely not. In childhood and most of my teens, I thought poems were all Hallmark material, and this was kind of a cloistered view. But ironically, the first poems that I ever really resonated with had to do with dissidents in the USSR speaking out and getting sent to the gulags. That was the first time poetry ever got real to me, and I dived into it. Now, I have since then become, and this over the decades, this has been you know, for my stand against the US's war of choice, where I felt like we were wrong to go into militaristic adventures. They have been for environmental causes, but then I started covering a lot of poets like J.H. Lawrence. And these days, though, just simply reading the events and such, I felt cheated when I realized how rich Ukrainian poetry was. I felt like I would have loved to have known this decades ago. I mean, I would have loved to have known Ukrainian music decades ago. I would have loved to have known from the perspective of anthropology and sociology what this means, because we don't look into the history of places in the world which are adjacent to Eurocentric imperialist histories, but are the people that are in between who are facing it as the colonized, not the colonizers. That is a lot there to miss. And the poetry that comes out from that is so deep. I actually want to read one more poem before maybe a question comes out. And I want you to hear this and realize the price Ukrainian poets paid to write. In the early 1930s, not only was there the largest of the Holodomors, plural, I say, there was the executed Renaissance, where being brilliant as a poet, a scientist, an author, um, anyone, but speaking in Ukrainian was certain to get you exiled or dead. One of the figures of the executed Renaissance, as they called it, Mikhailo Semenko, I particularly studied him because he had such a vision for Ukraine's future. I mean, it was he had a vision for Ukraine just rising up and having its place in the world, being among the voices of the world. He had an art form that he inspired. He had a kind of a science fiction of Ukraine panfuturism, where Ukraine was a part of the world. Of course, the NKVD came for him, and he knew. And in anticipation of his assassination, he went down in defiance and he wrote this poem, Patagonia, and it translates: I will not die of death. I will die of life. If I die, life will die. There no banner will fly. I will die young. Young I will die. For when will I be grown old? Leave the mourning aside. Cast away the funereal poems. I will die. In the wild Patagonia I will die, for I belong to fire and earth. My dears, I will not hear your cries. I'm a nobody, a poet of the world's words. I will die in a moment when all nature hushes, waiting for the red spattered night to be done. And I will die in the pause when my heart clutches my youth, my life, and my blood. And yes, the NKVD assassinated him. And so let us just honor that and keep Ukraine's defenders strong and keep them alive. Keep supporting those who are the most serious about saving Ukrainian lives, and let's encourage Ukrainians when they keep their culture and keep their language alive. I had recent opportunity to do that in remembrance of the Holodomor, and I did not expect the impact that I would have. But um, the reason all these tragedies befall Ukraine is that imperialist Russia cannot suffer the existence of another on its borders. And that is no just reason for anyone to be facing this. We are lucky that Ukraine is alive. Anyway, I would like to answer questions if there are any.
Alana,
Yeah, I
go
don't have
ahead.
any questions. I just wanted to say thank you to Daniel because he's an amazing Ukraine supporter. That's of people like Daniel, and I wish that we had, you know, m- more supporters like him because he's very perceptive, and he actually listens to Ukrainians, which is very very rare, and it's sad to acknowledge how rare it is. But then it makes you really appreciate people like Daniel when you come across them. So yeah, just wanted to chime in to say thank you.
No, thank you for for surviving when the world wants to erase you. I would say that to every Ukrainian because I have seen so many people who are struggling from the brink or did not win that fight, except in the knowledge of a few. And I think that it is so important for just our existence as humans and for our future that we cease to worship brutal power that would have erased Ukraine from the map for good if they could have. And I feel like I network sometimes between cultures that have fought back. And one thing, the Ojibwe Nation here in North America, one thing that their dancers have been saying is that if you wish to preserve a culture, you must continue to create that. When I saw that, for one thing, obviously I felt care and pride for Ojibwe survival, but I was like every other fighting culture needs to be hearing this. Ukrainians need to hear that, and we should bring that to them. So yeah, whenever a Ukrainian says I'm particularly listening or I'm particularly uh, loyal, I'll tell you the truth. It breaks my heart. I want to be the most mundane Ukraine supporter in the room. I I I want people to understand it is not a threat when when Ukrainians say, "Hey, this could be better," not to go defensive, not to double down. Because when we double down and stop hearing Ukrainians, we actually perpetuate what has favored Russia, what has allowed Russia to be the historian of Ukraine, and what has allowed Westerners to indulge that imperialistic hubris and not hear the voices of the colonized. Um, I I occasionally get in people's face about something. I really don't want to, and I hope it's for the sake of edification. I wish the tone could come because I really want everyone to rise to this level. Every pro-Ukrainian charity to be punching at the level of come back alive, and let's accept that that is a tough act to follow. You come back alive, and the Pritula Foundation are incredible and well-practiced organizations in Ukraine's cause, and Ukrainian activists like Sternenko, Class Act, and and let's just accept the fact that we are playing catch up. But let's take every opportunity and listen because yeah, lives are in the balance here. So I'll get off that soapbox, and I just want to hear from you.
Go ahead, Kugno.
Hey, Daniel, thank you so much so far. Work is absolutely amazing. I've been just enjoying this so much. It- Maybe not so much a question, or maybe just like a cause for you to elaborate. With Balakun, it's this initiative to teach English to Ukrainians, to give them that voice, and like your work with your poetry, moving it over into English is wonderful for those of us who don't speak Ukrainian or are trying to and just aren't progressing very well. But this kind of ties into what you were saying about like Timothy Snyder. It's just like we can be as English speakers, in this Western world, or in the English speaking world, like we could be supporters as much as we want, but ultimately at the end of the day, unless you've kind of had that like inner dialogue or inner realization, we look at things in the lens of the colonizer and not those who are being colonized. So I mean, maybe if you could just kind of elaborate, you've definitely touched on it earlier, but maybe just elaborate on how important it is to give Ukrainians voices, to hear their voice, and to share their experiences, as opposed to kind of having it translate it through a Western lens to actually hear it from their perspectives.
That's a great emphasis, a great thing to really think about. Okay, let's just start from the perspective I have as an American, as a citizen of the USA, and um, and other people from the American continents could have their uh, own perspective as well. Very few of us know what it means to have a brutal invasion on our home soil. Um, it's been generations since many of us have even seen a war. Most of us have seen a single day or two of a terrorist attack. As an American, speaking to other Americans, I would just ask, do you remember what impact it had on you? Do you remember 9/11? Um, it may be a slogan, but our 9/11 is there 24/7, just begins to scratch the surface of this. We do not know what it means to be the targets of war. For us, we think of war as something that we can choose to get into. No one starts a war with the USA in the open. No, that we are spared that. So there is an inevitably different attitude towards that when you just feel like maybe the warhawks in your country could just lay off of it a little bit. But no, actually, what is happening now is that people are being attacked in their own home country by those who wish to erase them. Let's just assume, even when we think we get it, we don't get it. We can never accept the day to day. Another thing that Yulia said that really hit me, um, she was talking about where she was in Ukraine, or contemplating going to Ukraine, and she was getting some basic medical training, and some Western friend, very well meaning, said, "Well, you just get them to the hospital." And she said, "I'm in a war zone, and in this situation, I might be the hospital." And there are so many details that we do not have to face. That yeah, we should be very slow to to correct Ukrainians about things. Now, there can be a bidirectional veil of assumptions. I think sometimes there are some rather bad ambassadors from the West that talk to Ukrainians. The the only caution I can offer to that is for Ukrainians to just assume that we're not a monolith, and just kind of watch and wait. But it far and away, it is Ukrainians who are overdue to be heard. Far and away, it is they who are not well understood. We Westerners have had the megaphone. We are used to it. We are privileged by that. hardly anyone in the world cannot hear from us. We need to get Ukrainians heard for change. I feel like there might be more that you were asking. I want to make sure I answer all of your questions, Quignor.
No, I think that was beautifully said. Yeah, it's just I know Aliona's she's always a big proponent of Ukrainian voices, and I just as much help as I love to do on a day to day basis, like I don't want to feel like I'm stealing a narrative that I shouldn't be stealing, and that's why Balakun is so important to me. Like anybody who I can get to speak English so that they can share their story, and I don't share their story through them. That to me is just so much more important. So, no, I think you elaborated on it beautifully.
I just echo what Quignor said is uh, one thing that what, for people like me, and I think a lot of the people who volunteer with Balakun are the same. You see a problem and you want to help, you want to solve a problem, you want to fix it, and sometimes you can't solve the problem, but you can listen, and that changes the way the other person feels. And so if you're like me and you want to solve everyone's problems, you're not going to be able to. But sometimes just listening can alleviate something for somebody. And that's what I've found, and that's why I find it rewarding, and that's why I want so many other people to get involved.
If I
I
may say something, please.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you. First, Daniel, thank you so much for all these. You're truly an inspiration. And about what you said about poetry, well, my native language is not English, it's Spanish, but I had a similar experience. One Ukrainian colleague, he knows that I speak Spanish, so he sent to me an online Spanish translation of Sapovit by Taras Shevchenko. I read the translation. The translation had mistakes, like in Spanish, but I found this translation so powerful. Like then I looked for the English version because unfortunately my Ukrainian is not good, and I thought like, oh my God, in Spanish it sounds with the mistakes, it sounds powerful. In English, the translation was better, so it sounds even more powerful. How it would sound in Ukrainian, like how it would sound in the native Ukrainian. And I had a similar experience with another person sharing with me the poem Любить Україна by Volodymyr Sosюra. And it's in when you well, of course, the English translation, and when you want to translate that into Spanish, you need to use more words because, of course, there are different languages, but it sounds like so beautiful. It sounds so beautiful, and it's impressive. And what you're saying is true. It's not only from the English perspective. We need, if we want to really support Ukraine, we need to do this in this exercise, like to answer these questions about like if we understand that we really are can put ourselves like in the situation. And there's a poem, I don't know if probably you've heard it, it's Home. It's by a British poet poetess, sorry. And it describes like the situation with refugees, and basically one part of the poem says that you only leave home when home won't let you stay. So really, thank you so much for all this, Daniel. You're an inspiration. Thank you.
As are you, Rebecca, and as is this group. I have participated in a lot of cultural exchange forums and ways for people to understand each other, um, and so I can tell, uh, Rebecca, I resonate a lot with what you're saying. the the whole language of figuring out what's going on in a whole nother part of the world, in another culture, is there. The kind of discipline is there. The patience is there. Ukrainians have not gotten the full benefit of that for so much of their history. There is a poem that is coming to mind out of a collection that Ukrainians translated. The original was written by Katerina Kalitko, Nikto nas tut. And the full translation of the anthology, it is titled Nobody Knows Us Here, and We Don't Know Anyone. And it is all about the refugee experience. I want to read something from it. I will confess, the first time I actually read this poem, I was reckless and dared to read it. I dared to read it on a live video cast, and there were people watching, and I'd never seen this poem before. I'd only read other great poems from the book, and it cut me to pieces, and it still gets me. And so they left and abandoned the chairs on the street, and we never had a chance to ask them where they were from. Other people came to look out of their windows on the square of the sky, so to say, prayed over. But they did not pray too diligently and didn't believe in much. Perhaps they only believed in a couple of Saturday candles and their circle of light. Only their little girl, whom they did not tell to do this, found a white crystal of mountain quartz in a tea can, between many dusty souvenirs from which the ethers of emotions evaporated. It refracted the bezels of rays, transforming them into fountains of radiance. And the little girl said, God is here. And nobody could argue against it. And so they left. And the little girl kept the treasured bag with God in her lap. And in the new home, in a hole, from all sides surrounded by the ribs of other people's houses, a different light came to live with them. It did not spread out on the roofs, did not capture the birds into the shining maelstrom. And the crystal seemed angry. It did not refract the rays. It did not bring back the radiance. Will God hear my prayers from another place? Will he see me here where I ended up? The girl asked, with her first grief in her voice. And nobody could explain anything to her. And so they left, and God stopped smiling. That's still a very hard poem for me to read without losing my level, because that speaks to the level of abandonment if we turn our backs and what Ukrainians are already going through. And I don't think I can even fully speak to it, but that was a Ukrainian voice translated in English. I truly do not want my translated work to end up as a book deal. The only way it should ever be monetized is 100% for Ukraine. This is their story. And I insist, and I have said before, taking the people out of the center of the story to whom that story belongs is a disinformation tactic. We need to center Ukrainian voices about Ukraine. And it will cut you to pieces if you see it. But still keep on. And that is the good fight. So yeah, Rebecca, I am fully with you on that. And we need to keep amplifying them. First and foremost, our roles are support, and they are this is their story.
Yes, and I am glad that they're being amplified not only in English but in other languages as well. I think it's important. I mean, in Latin America, that they are amplified in Spanish, because we usually get like the propaganda and the narrative, and it's sad for me to say that uh, usually this is more common in Spanish. Maybe because, as Sam said, like their tentacles reach everywhere. But still, I agree with you. We should keep focusing on Ukraine. And if we can bring this to other languages, I think that this is how we can prove that we are with Ukraine, no matter where we are in the world.
This is also why I really love following other translators, especially Ukrainian ones. And I admire the translators of what I just read to you. I mean, the Ukrainian member of that team was Oksana Lutsishina, and she has been very well. Very well, I would say, spoken in her role. She is not just a translator; she is a novelist and a professor. And I have been reading her novel Ivan and Phoebe, which is a fascinating novel because it concerns the activism that surrounded Ukraine's emergence into independence in the 1990s. And at every turn, in the 1990s, Ukraine becoming independent. In 2004, the Orange Revolution. 2014, Maidan. There has been a building voice, and I think um, in some ways there's an intergenerational difference in how that voice is expressed. And I mean, really piping up in the late stages of the Soviet Union was an act of courage, and who knows who it could have gone. Piping up and wearing orange in 2004, well, the propaganda told you you were the minority. And so a lot of Ukrainians felt like they are just eccentrics and off in their off in their world, but then they wore the colors and realized they're the majority. Um, so we're adding to the efforts of these people and let that continue to be so. I'm really glad that it's being translated into Spanish. There are such rich poetry, traditions of poetry in Spanish. I have a full anthology of Neruda, and the same people who could appreciate that could appreciate. Taras Shevchenko, Vasil Stus, Lena Kostenko. There is so much soul in those words. Um, I'd like to pause for anyone's comments or questions. Otherwise, I've always got more poems.
For anyone who's joined recently, please feel free to request to be a speaker. Sorry, if you've got a question. But otherwise, let's hear another one, Daniel.
And I feel like I'm amplifying here a Ukrainian voice addressing Ukrainians. Lena Kostenko, about the dearest ones. He kept writing in memory, not in memorial. Because what's in memorial? A sigh that flies away. And a memory is something unique, something indescribably sad and unreplaced. Once it wraps its wings around you, it never leaves, it can never be erased. It is a whole world, another dimension, and after death it still never goes away. Maybe the memory is a distant dream, where souls looking for warmth can stay. So where will it warm itself now, and to whom will it wing on its way? Yarina will be killed, Natalka will be married, Katrusia will disappear in Alsace. My mother will die, my father will be gone. There'll be another house on the mountain place. And who will ever see those photos? And who in the world will care about them again? The willow tree will dry up, the pear will be cut down. They'll make a green sea of the Dnipro. My brother is still alive, but his heart has grown hard. There's my sister, but she is now old. There are monuments, slabs, and columns, and memorials with ceremonial bouquets. And who are we? We are one of millions to everyone. And some of us are the only one to somebody. That's why we're human. And life is going on all around. And that's why there's people and nations and family. You have no one else left in the world. but in the world, you have me, Lena Kostenko. I would say Lena Kostenko is an immense treasure. Um, she's an it's an interesting figure. She, for one, is quite against Ukrainian cussing being so popularized in the world. And yet, I don't think anyone here fails to see how sometimes cussing along with Ukrainians and Ukrainians is a great way to validate their feelings and share in part. Um, it's one of those cases where I don't think what I've heard in a lot of our spaces would be what I would repeat if I was ever so lucky as to meet Lena Kostenko. But yeah, you meet everyone where they're at, and I do admire her. Um, I would love to hear more from Ukrainians in this space.
Yeah, Ukrainians swear a lot, and I think in it has become like more normalized with the full scale invasion to swear in public. I remember like on the first day, like TV hosts were, you know, they're usually like very well composed and like formal and stuff, and they were swearing like live on TV, and um, I guess it's like, you know, there is that kind of mental that level of stress when you just cannot express yourself otherwise. So yeah, it's become pretty much like trivialized over the last couple of years, I would say.
And that may be so, but psychologists will tell you that people who swear and just get their get their hearts out on their sleeves have better outcomes in dealing with grief and trauma, and they also tend to be more well-adjusted and honest in in their world. So even as a casual layman of psychology, I would have endorsed that view. But everything that I have seen on my screen, um, that that I share in, and I'm very aware that the word for my role in this and my experience of this is secondary trauma. I'm watching what happens to Ukrainians, and yes, it impacts me. Some days I have to take downtime. And other days I have to burn that outrage and grief and put it into a call to my congressional representative. And and I feel that many Ukraine supporters can relate to that. And I mean across different groups and clusters, even if we have our spats, that is a common ground for Ukraine supporters in the West. If we care about Ukraine, um, we, we validate the Ukrainian experience first. Um, another another Ukrainian translator that I admire, and some of us know or interact with. And I'm afraid I'm about to butcher his last name because he writes it in Romanized letters. Stephen Komanikich. No, I did butcher that, but he has been translating Victoria Amelina's poems. Unless someone else has a better idea, I'd like to read one of them because that gets Ukrainians heard.
Go ahead.
I have a son, and she also has a son. She had two sons before the war, but I always had one. And just try to explain still to someone else that she still has two sons, and the bright-eyed one did not die and did not disappear, that she will give birth to him every day with a scream. But it is the scream of a woman and not a baby, and the boy does not scream at all now, and she will give birth to him every day. He watches her silently from the darkness, as if begging her to him help. But she will give birth to him herself, and now there's darkness between her and me. Because I have a son, and she has a son. She had 2 sons before the war, and I always had one. And just try to explain to someone else that I and her have 3 sons altogether. I that hits me right in the feels, and I greatly admire Stephen for bringing Victoria's words and not letting Victoria be forgotten.
Yeah, I shared this poem in the Nest. It was written by Victoria Melina about to Svetlana Povalyeva. She's the mother of Roma Ratishnin.
But there's something I want to stress about this whole thing of translation at whatever skill level you bring at. And as I mentioned before, I'm a beginner in spoken Ukrainian. What I'm bringing to the table is not just that I know how to be careful with the AI tools, it's that I have got a background in comparative translations and in comparing translations side by side and looking up interesting words to try to get a sense of their context and at least know what are the parts that you most urgently need to bring to Ukrainian attention. I will just go back to Parabendia for an example. There was an early translation of that, and I got some things quite wrong, not because I misunderstood the words, but because I did not understand their cultural context. You all remember that little line, and to the ladies amidst the fields, he'll sing of the spells they're casting. That is a very different translation than I started. The reason being, I was seeing words that alluded to spring and freckles. So I thought that that was the theme of his song. No, Freckles actually turned out to be Hrytsia, the name of the main character of a Ukrainian folktale of of a of a woman who loved a certain fellow and who her rivals got so jealous of that when it came time for her to build a house, it was built of pine, of a coffin, and it's a dark and tragic tale, but it had to do with all of the all of the kind of you could say Brothers Grimm level of dark about story of witchcraft and rivalry and all those sort of things, and it became clear line by line. There was a folk song here, a story there, a rich cultural tapestry that, in the end, I will never get perfect as a translator. There will always be more to explore, and I am only making the introduction to you. I really think more people would deeply enjoy to learn Ukrainian and and get that literature out. But in the immediate here and now, getting their voice out has been crucial. Their news stories. Um, One thing that I managed to pull off, on a team with Ukrainians, was getting Come Back Alive's 2022 report. And as I went through that, it was more than I could have imagined. I had no idea just how amazing Ukrainians had gotten in supporting from the volunteers. Ukrainian volunteers had gotten so good since 2014 at supporting the armed forces of Ukraine. And I went into it expecting to be impressed, and still my mind was blown. And I was lucky because I was proofreading the English, I was analyzing the Ukrainian, I was comparing, and then Ukrainians were proofreading me. And so we got that done. But I feel like we could do so much more of that, and I think many of us would still appreciate what is going on here and how much more we could do. So whatever you can do in the space, getting Ukrainians speaking English, getting English speakers speaking Ukrainian, I think it's going to be an amazing work. I
I
would
think,
love.
and unless there's anyone else who wants to ask a question, should we finish with another poem, Daniel? I'm sure you
I
have
would love
lots.
to hear Ukrainian voices and questions, but you don't have to twist my arm to get me started on a poem. Um, Goodness, I here, let me pick one while we maybe pause and wait. I would love for Ukrainian speakers to speak.
Well, I can add that I was really glad that you decided to join us today because I really appreciate everything you do for us. Also, when I was translating the videos for Slovo Dilo, you were helping me to proofread and things like that. Thank you, Daniel, for supporting us.
Thank you. And yes, I've picked a poem. I've picked a poem that first made me feel like I have to learn Ukrainian one day. It was very early on in the invasion. A a guardswoman was warily reloading ammunition clips. Uh, no, Christina Kudryava is my understanding. If I, yeah, I understand that's who it was. She was speaking the poem, one of Yuri Izdrik's, and I actually went on a big explore and apparently bought a bunch of Yuri Izdrik's anthologies, but not the right ones to get this poem. Tatiana, I think you're the one that helped me figure out which poem it was. I will read the English. When you reach the edge and step over, and the darkness swallows you up, make just one wish, and she will say, don't be afraid. I'm standing together with you. When you are cornered, when you lose the way, and give up almost without a fight, this will save you. I'm with you. I'm right here. Don't be afraid. I'm right here. I'm standing with you. When despair and doubt and fatigue and fear make you paranoid, it will sound like a revelation in her words. It's okay. I'm here. I'm standing with you. And when the world's alignment is broken and the sky is rolled up like a scroll, her words will still come out of nowhere. It's okay. I'm here. I'm standing with you. The poem is titled Yazit Deboyu. And I understand that that is a especially strong meaning of I am standing with you. It is an adamant and brave stand. And oh gosh, if anyone has that handy in Ukrainian, if if there's a way I would wish for the space to be wrapped up, it would be to hear that in Ukrainian. Let's does anyone have it? I can get it to you. Tatiana, I will message you.
You can do you have it like a tweet? You can put it in the nest if you want.
I do. Actually, I can easily put it in the comments, and here
Awesome.
it comes. So I will, I will consider that a good way to to share this because I think that the Ukrainian voice is always the strongest voice, and there's so many nonverbals in that video. I'll add it to the comments on this space and consider that a good final word on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It was a real pleasure, and I'm so happy that this was recorded because we can share it with so many people who would not have heard those poems otherwise. Just thank you sincerely.
Doc you and thank you and Slav Ukraine.
Героям слава.